Good, happy Friday evening. I'm Riley King, and welcome to this Friday evening edition of the Riley King Network Investigates. A close call. How serial killer Rodney Alcala appeared on the dating game and won. That's all tonight, right here on the Riley King Network Investigates. It begins right now. Good, happy Friday evening. I'm Riley King, and thank you for joining us for this Friday evening edition of the Riley King Network Investigates. A close call. How serial killer Rodney Alcala appeared on the dating game and won. Alcala has been convicted of killing 7 women in the 1970s. Let's begin. When the dating game host Jim introduced Rodney Alcala as Bachelor Number 1, a successful photographer, he didn't know that the man had allegedly murdered at least 5 women and had been charged with the attempted murder of a little girl. Alcala has since been convicted of killing 7 women in the 1970s. He was charged with murder for the first time in 1979 for the death of a 12-year-old who disappeared in June that year on her way to a ballet studio. Her remains were found nearly 2 weeks later in the San Gabriel Mountains, north of Los Angeles. The dating game appearance is just a bizarre part about this case, said Matt Murphy, an ABC News contributor and former prosecutor who was assigned to Alcala's case in 2003. And I think that what it reflects is the narcissism and ego and the arrogance of a serial killer. Alcala appeared on the 1978 episode of the hit TV game show. Executive producer Mike and his future wife, contestant coordinator Ellen, say they initially disagreed on whether Alcala should have been a contestant when he auditioned. At the time, the technology didn't exist for background checks or national database, so nobody who worked on the show was aware that Alcala had a criminal history by this point that included an attempted murder charge of an 8-year-old girl. He was attractive and all the women were going to love him, Ellen told us. But her future husband felt differently, saying that he had a strange personality. He had a mystique about him that I found uncomfortable, said Mike, the show's executive producer. Ultimately, they decided to have Alcala on the show. David Greenfield, a producer on the game show when Alcala appeared on it, said that he'd grown up watching the show, but didn't realize until he started working on it that many of the people who audition for it aren't looking for a date, but rather a chance to be on TV. The show's format involved one bachelorette choosing which of the 3 bachelors to go on a date with, after a questioning period in which the bachelors are hidden from view. It had become hugely popular during the 1960s because there had never been a dating show of that nature, and people could live vicariously through either The Bachelor or The Bachelorette, Greenfield said. In the 1970s came around, the show producers changed the show to match American culture at that time, and its popularity continued to rise. One of our editors was to make the show more sexier and much more proactive than the show in the 60s, said Greenfield. Part of this meant making the Bachelorette's question more open-ended in order to elicit rancorous responses. It was rather extraordinary to see these bachelors and bachelorettes vie for each other in such an outward way. In the 60s, it was much more reversed. You would play it safe. In our show, anything went, he said. During the episode in which Alcala appeared, Bachelorette Cheryl asked him questions like, "What's your best time?" And "I'm serving you for dinner. What am I serving you for dinner? What are you called? And what do you look like?" Alcala responded to a later saying, "I'm called the Banana, and I look good." "Can you be a little more descriptive?" Cheryl asked Alcala. "Peel me," he said, prompting the audience to laugh. In retrospect, Greenfield said it sounded horrible, but at that time, that's a good, solid answer. We were looking for ranchy, sexy answers, and that was one. Take it in context now. It's like, oh my god. Cheryl ended up choosing Alcala at the end of the show. It was exactly what Alcala had planned, according to fellow contestant Jed Mills, who was Bachelor number 2 and sat next to Alcala during the episode. Mills described Alcala as creepy and said that when they were in the green room before the show, Alcala told him, "I always get my girl." However, when Alcala was finally introduced to Cheryl, Ellen said excitement to see him turned into a pretty lukewarm togetherness. The next day, she said Cheryl called the show's office and spoke to her. She said, "Ellen, I can't go out with this guy. There's weird vibes that are coming off from him. He's very strange. I'm not comfortable. Is that going to be a problem?" And, of course, I said no. They were two of many bachelors and bachelorettes who never ended up on a date, although Greenfield said they would have had a chaperone if they followed through with it, like every couple that went on the dates following their appearance on the show. When I watch the show now, it's hard for me to watch it without looking behind his eyes and knowing that this guy had to be thinking. Greenfield said just the evil behind the smile. There's sometimes where I can see it, but I think that's my mind working overtime because, again, I can't imagine anybody that would commit a crime and then purposely go on television. By the time that Alcala was convicted of murdering Robin in 1980 and sentenced to death, investigators had found a trove of evidence in a Seattle storage locker room belonging to Alcala. There, they found hundreds of photographs of unidentified women, girls, and boys, some of whom were nude or in composing positions. They also found jewelry that they believe Alcala kept as trophies from some of his victims, including a pair of gold ball earrings that matched the description of those worn by Robin on the day she disappeared. 4 years after he was convicted of murder and sentenced to death, Alcala pleaded his case and won a new trial. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death a second time. In 2001, he pleaded yet again and won, putting a third trial in motion. Prosecutor Matt Murphy took on the case in 2003, after which he had the jewelry found in Alcala's storage locker re-examined for DNA. Authorities found that some of the DNA matched that of 4 other women who had been found dead or had disappeared in the late 1970s, confirming that Alcala was the serial killer police had suspected him to be. Among the women whose DNA matched that on evidence found in the storage locker room were 19-year-old Jill, whose body was found on a Los Angeles roadside in 1977 with her face mutilated and ligatures around her neck. Georgia, a 27-year-old nurse whose body was found naked and brutalized in her Malibu, California home in 1977. Charlotte, whose body was found strangled and raped in an apartment complex miles away from her home in June 1978, months before Alcala's appearance on The Dating Game. And Jill, a 21-year-old college student who was found raped and murdered in her bedroom in June of 1979. Alcala was 66 years old when he was convicted for these women's murders and sentenced to death following a 2010 trial in which he represented himself. He later pleaded guilty to the New York City murders of Cornelia in 1977 and Ellen in 1978. He was also charged in 2016 with the murder of Christina in the summer of 1977, but authorities decided not to extradite him to Wyoming for trial due to his failing health. He has denied killing Christina and has not entered a plea for the charges. Alcala, now 77, is serving his time at Crane State Prison, where his execution has been postponed indefinitely due to a moratorium on the death penalty instituted by California state in 2019. And thank you for joining us for this evening edition of the Riley King Network Investigates. I hope you all enjoyed watching this Friday evening edition of the Riley King Network Investigates. See you back here next Friday for another edition of the Riley King Network Investigates. Good night and goodbye, everyone.